Hey guys, here today showing you, well, I have a kind of a longer video showing you how to replace a timing belt, water pump, spark plugs, cam seals, crank seals, pretty much everything that needs to be done when you do a timing belt and a water pump on a 2JZ engine. This is a 2JZ GE, not a turbo engine. This is found in I believe 1998 through 2005 is300s, gs300s. This particular car is a 2001 gs300, and like I said, I'll be doing the timing belt and the water pump. But there's also things that you want to do while you're in there, like the crank seal and the cam seals, because those leak a lot. I'll show you here in a minute that this engine is leaking too much. And you also want to do the valve cover gaskets because you have to take them off anyway. So there's a lot of things that you need to get in order to get ready to do this job. I'll leave a link in the description below of the kit that I bought. It's made from a company called Evergreen. I got the kit on Amazon, and it cost me about 206 bucks. It's a Evergreen water pump and timing belt kit. It comes with a brand new water pump. It comes with the new timing belt, idler pulley. It comes with a new timing belt tensioner. This kit worked for me. There are other kits that you can buy. You know, there's kits on eBay that you can find. There's a pretty decent kit that comes with everything for about 300 bucks on eBay. It'll come with everything you need. Pretty much the timing belt and the water pump are the bare minimum of what you need. However, I suggest getting the entire kit that comes with the cam seals and the crank seals and the valve cover gaskets. In addition to getting all the parts that you need, I highly suggest getting this crank pulley holder tool here. It's made by SP Tools. That's the part number 64300. This crank pulley bolt is torqued to 243 foot-pounds. So unless you have a very strong air impact gun or an electric impact gun, mine never works on these. And honestly, it's best to just get this tool. I mean, you don't have to get this one in specific, but any Toyota or Lexus crank pulley tool should work. This one cost me about 80 bucks on Amazon. It just sits into the crank. You use a 3/4 inch breaker, or excuse me, 1/2 inch drive breaker bar, and I always end up using a long cheater bar in order to break this loose. Pretty much I pull the handle off my jack there, and I that's the only reason I'm able to break that crank pulley loose, because that bolt is on very tight. So if you don't have this tool, of course there's other ways you can try and find out a way to hold the crank pulley while you loosen it up, but I promise you, you're going to have a battle. So please just buy this tool, or maybe if there's a shop that rents this tool, rent it, but you will need it. There's not really a way around it. So obviously the first thing you need to do is jack the car up, get it on jack stands. As you see, I have it in the air already, and then we can go on ahead and obviously work on it when it's cold, but we can drain the coolant out now, so that way we can work on other things while the coolant is draining. We pop down here in the bottom real quick. You'll see that we need to, excuse the lighting, we'll need to remove this splash shield that's under here. It's held on just by a bunch of 10mm bolts that go all the way around, and there's a 2 in the back. So yeah, just loosen up those screws, and then you could just set the splash shield down on the ground behind the car. I just slide it backwards, and then I will show you where the petcock is to drain the radiator. You could put all the bolts inside of it if you want, that way you know where they all go. Bottom of the radiator on the driver's side, if you look right here where this tube is at, there's a little wing nut kind of deal here. Pretty much just turn that left to loosen it up, and then the coolant will start draining out of there. You could take the cap off the top of the radiator. That'll help relieve the vacuum, and it should flow out a lot faster. Okay, while we have the coolant draining, sorry if you hear that in the background, sounds like someone's taking a piss. There are a lot of things that we need to take off in order to get at everything we need. First off, by taking the this here engine cover off. It's just held on by 4 10mm bolts or nuts. Just lift this straight up, set it down, put the bolts back in it, that way you know where they go. I will try and take things off as complete as possible, so that way you don't have to go around, you know, piecing every little piece together. I'll try and take off everything as we can. We need to take off this entire intake system up into this Y pipe here, so that way we have access to the valve covers and everything else that we need. Right now I'm going to focus on taking this whole air assembly off. You can start by undoing this one 10mm right here that holds this air snorkel on. This will just slide straight off just like that. What I like to do is put the screws, if you can, put the screws back where they go. If not, get yourself like a little bag or something to mark what you need. That way you don't forget where things go. Okay, next thing you want to do is to undo this here evap connector. They're just little tabs. You just squeeze the tab and lift them off. Mass airflow sensor, also just squeeze the tab and take it off. Do be careful with this stuff because it's going to be really fragile. The wiring harness you can just let sit for a minute and just let it hang there. It's fine. Now if you're looking at this here evap canister thing that comes on the side of the air box, there is one rubber hose that goes down back to the back of the engine. Pretty much just disconnect this here hose right here, just disconnect it from the side of the air box and just let that one hang there. You can leave that one there, and you can leave the actual solenoid attached to this whole box. So when we pull the whole box out, it'll just come as one. So we need to loosen up this here clamp right here, that where the air box goes into. It's just one 10mm clamp. Just loosen that guy up, just let him be on here. And there's a total of 3 bolts that are holding the air box on, 2 that you can see right here behind the box, and then there's one directly right behind the headlight, straight down right here. You have to get an extension and take that guy out. Again, be careful, you try not to break anything because all this stuff's going to be really old. So with that loose, you can go on ahead and just lift this whole entire air box out and set it down at the side. I'm going to put the screws back in the holes where I got them from. That way I don't forget where they go. So once that's out of the way, you can see that opened up a lot of space for you to work, because you will need it. Right now I'm going to focus on the whole intake system. Okay, so next thing we need to do is remove the rest of the intake that goes into the here throttle body. Right on the back of the intake there is a vacuum hose. It's just held on by 2 little clamps. You can just grab the hose with a pair of pliers and wiggle it around and loosen it up, and then just pull it straight off. It's just a vacuum breather that's in the back. And then you can also just remove it from the PCV valve that goes straight into the back of the motor. Just take that off and set it down to the side. This here piece is just held on by this one clamp right here that goes right to the throttle body. There's just a 10mm right here, and then you can just pull this whole guy straight off just like this. There's just this one 10mm clamp right here, that's it. And then you can go ahead and set this guy down to the side as well. Okay, the next part we need to focus on taking off is this throttle body assembly here. The trickiest part for this, I think, is not all the bolts that are holding it on. There's only a few, but there are 2 coolant lines that run to it. There's one that comes up from right here that's really hard to get at, and then there's another one that's up underneath the throttle body that's kind of hard to see. So I'm going to move the camera over to this side so you can see everything that's going on. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is just disconnect the various electrical connectors. There's one here, and one here. Just pretty much squeeze the tabs and They should just pull off. Again, some of them might be a little bit more difficult than others, and you can just kind of set them back to the side. You can also remove this here vacuum hose that's right here. Just get yourself a pair of pliers and pinch the clamp and take the clamp off. You may have to twist these around in order to get them off. That guy just comes off like so. I'm going ahead and disconnect this here connector in the back as well. Like I said, some of these might need a little bit of persuasion to get off. This guy came off. Right here you can see there's a little clamp right here. You don't actually have to take the clip off, but there's a 10 millimeter right here that you can just loosen up, loosen the 10, and then this whole thing will come off of here. And as I said, just let that hang down to the side. You can put the screw right back where you got it from. Okay, the next thing you want to do is get yourself a, I believe this is a 14 millimeter 14 millimeter wrench. That way you can loosen up this here throttle cable. Don't touch this side that's closest to the passenger side. Just loosen up the other side. And then if you can manually operate this. If you roll it around, you can see where it'll just slide right out of the side over here. And then you can just set the throttle cable down to the side. So the only thing now we have holding this guy on is these two 12 millimeter bolts right here. And there's also right below a 12 millimeter nut that holds this thing on a long bolt. So we'll have to loosen these guys right here, this 12 of the bracket, and then loosen this bracket right here from the cylinder head. There's two 12s right here as well. Also get yourself a pair of little pair of pliers right here to take this wiring harness off. Let me see if I can get in there with a skinny pair of pliers. Okay, so now I can focus on, I'm just going to crack all these loose. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then these two on the bottom. I'm just going to crack them loose. I'm not going to take them off. I'm just going to loosen them up. Now I will tell you that this here isolator is rubber, so when you do this it's going to flex a lot. You might have the potential to break this. I like to just give a little bit of pressure right here on the front and loosen that up. So that way you don't risk cracking this, because that piece is probably hard to find by now. And you can throw your socket on the ground like I did. Okay, so once you got those loose, go on ahead and completely remove this bracket, which is held on by these four 12 millimeter nuts. Okay. And just slide this here bracket off completely, and you can put the nuts right back, like I said, where they go. That way you don't forget. You can just set the bracket down. But if you look on the other side, like I mentioned before, there is another coolant line that comes up and straight into the back of this here. I've already taken the clamp off. The clamp is right here where my pliers are. You can just loosen it up. It goes right into a brass fitting. Loosen that, and then you can just pull the you can just pull this hose off. This one is generally pretty easy. You can see I pull it off right here, and you can just, you know, tuck this off to the side wherever you want to tuck it at. So I do advise to take this back coolant hose off first, and then once you do that, you can loosen these guys up. These 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can actually slide this whole thing mostly off and kind of flip it around so you can get a better look at this other bottom coolant hose. So I've already got this one off, so I'm going to go on ahead and remove these other nuts now. They're just long bolts. I'll just slide off like so. Then you can flip it around and deal with getting this bottom coolant hose off here. You can just tuck this hose up somewhere so it doesn't spill. Then you can go ahead and set this whole throttle assembly down. Okay, next thing we need to do is to focus on taking off this here Y pipe area that we got here. Not too hard to deal with. The evap, that green thing right there and the hoses going into it, that kind of can be a pain, but because they're really fragile by now, but we'll get to it. So first off is to take this here PCV breather off. It is held on by a 10mm screw right here that I recommend just taking this off and pulling this thing out rather than trying to risk breaking this piece of plastic. Just take this off and you can pop this guy out of place. Same with this. You can just pull this guy straight out like that, and that way you don't have to worry about trying to take this here hose off. Just like so, you can just set this down. Electrical connector that's here, it's held on by 110 right here. If you can get a 10mm and take this one little nut off right here, it's just one little guy just right here. We can loosen that up. Trying our best to keep all the hoses and whatnot intact, so that way we don't have to touch much else. So that guy is now loose from here. Then directly to the right of that, or directly behind this, you'll see that there is a small vacuum hose and a larger vacuum hose that are attached to this piece. Now what you want to do is slowly move both those hoses off of the nipples that they're on. If you break them, I'm sorry, you probably will, because I have, and I usually do. I don't intend to, but that's just kind of what happens because they're just really fragile. So just try your best to get them off, and then we can go from there. I got one of them off, the little guy. Now we're just going to try and get this big one off. This is what it looks like here. I did split this hose, so I'm probably just going to replace it. I can guarantee you're probably going to split it, but it just, like I said, it happens 9 out of 10 times. So you can take a little electrical tape and just wrap it around, you know, tight, loosely, just wrap it around and seal that back up. Or you can go and grab yourself another hose. I'll leave that to whatever you want to do. So yeah, you pretty much can just let this stuff stay out of the way. You'll only have to move it later when you take this valve cover off. But other than that, everything else should be free and not attached to anything else. This here Y piece is held on by, it's held on by these here 12mm screws. There's one here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the bottom. The ones from the bottom, just use long extensions to come in from right here, and then you should be able to reach them all. Once this is loose, there are some vacuum lines underneath this guy that you need to also loosen up and remove. You'll see them once you take them off. They're small, like this guy over here. That should be now loose. You just slide it off. Like I said, it will be held on by some vacuum hoses that are on the bottom. If you just tilt this guy up, you can see where there's one tiny little vacuum hose that's right down here on the bottom. You could just do your best to wiggle it loose and take it off. And there's also a metal gasket that's back here. Save this gasket, you can reuse it. You can buy a new one if you want, but I always save them and just reuse them. Just like so. Now that's off. This is the little vacuum hose I was talking about. The gasket, you can honestly, you could just leave it right there. It's not gonna hurt anybody. You can just leave it there and set this whole guy to the side. When you do put it on, don't forget to wipe all this off, and we'll worry about that when we get there. Very clear access to do the spark plugs. Another thing I recommend doing at this time is doing the spark plugs as well. Okay, so the first thing you want to do when taking the radiator out is, by now this thing should have all drained the coolant out by now. So you can go on ahead and close the petcock back up, that thing that's dripping there. Just close that back up completely tight. That way when you put the new coolant in, it's just not running out. And then also there are 2 rubber lines that go straight to the bottom of the radiator. Those are transmission cooler lines. There's one kind of right here that you can see, this rubber line right here. Not the big one, the small one behind it. And then there's another part of one right there as well. Those are just held on by either screw clamps or tiny little clamps like this guy right here that's on this hose. Just use a pair of pliers, move them back. and then take those two rubber lines off. Transmission fluid will come out, not a whole lot, so don't lose your mind if some comes out and you're wondering how much you need to put back in. If you're quick enough, you know, you just take it off and you'll just point it straight up into the air as best as you can. There are tools called like little hose clamps. They pretty much look like pliers. Here, let me grab one, I'll show you. These guys right here, these are called hose clamps. You pretty much, you put this thing up to the top. These are really cheap. You can buy them at Harbor Freight. It'll pinch the line and you can tighten it up as, you know, as these go down, it'll tighten it up on the line. That way it doesn't leak. You can use these if you want, or like I said, you don't have to. You can just point them straight up into the air so they don't leak. You could get a screw that's just about the same size as the opening and screw the screw in there and put a zip tie on the screw. That'll hold it. It's just something temporary. It's not going to be permanent, just so you don't lose a bunch of transmission fluid. Now, if you do so happen to drop a lot of transmission fluid, hopefully you don't, then, you know, you're going to have to check your dipstick when you go and drive the car later. But first thing I'm going to do is take those two lines off, and then everything else can be done mostly back from up on top. So I'm going to go ahead and take those off now. I'll get right back to you. Okay, I also forgot to mention while you're down there to take off the lower radiator hose. It's just also held on by a clamp. Pretty easy to get off. I'm going to go and take off the upper radiator hose, just held on by a few hose clamps. And just set this guy down. If you look right here, that goes into the fuse box, there's a little cooler that cools down the fuse box area. It just pretty much pops off, and you could just leave it attached to the fan shroud if you want. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so the next thing we need to do now is to go down to the bottom of the radiator. If you look up, there is two clips that go in that run the fans. You'll just unclip both of those. They're just little tabs that you push and pull them out. I'm sorry, I thought I could do all this from the top. I just worked on the is300 and you can do everything from the top. Apparently on the GS's you got to do from the bottom. So there's two connectors there for the fans. You don't need to remove the fans from the radiator. We're going to take this whole thing out as one assembly. So just go down there, you'll see the clamps that I'm talking about. Remove both of the clips, and then you can go ahead and come back up. We can take off these two here holders and then remove the fan assembly. Okay, once you got the two fan connectors detached, there is a coolant temperature sensor also down there in the bottom. You'll see it. You go ahead and loosen up that, come back up top, take off these two 12mm bolts, and then you can just hold the radiator and lift these guys off like so. You want to do your best to not try to lean this forward, because more coolant and transmission fluid and whatnot is going to come out like it already did. Just try your best to just lean it forward and pull it straight up, and it'll come out. You can just set these guys to the side for a minute. You just pull this whole thing out as a unit. Then what I suggest doing while this is out is spraying through this, cleaning this whole radiator off, because this thing is really disgusting. But you can just lay this, you can tilt it up somewhere or lay it down where all the ports are facing up so nothing spills out of it, however you want to do it. Okay, now we're ready to first off tackle this crank pulley bolt. As I said, you need to get this tool because it will help you tremendously. You can try and see if you can fit a impact in here. I have a small impact that fits, but it never works. If you have a bigger impact, chances are you're gonna have to remove the condenser, and you don't want to go through all that trouble of discharging the AC and whatnot. I always recommend leaving the serpentine belt on for this portion. It just gives a little bit of extra resistance. Although if you have a holder like I do, what I do is just, you take this here holder, there's two screws that are in this here harmonic balancer. I do recommend that if you do buy the same tool that I bought, the screws that come with it are too long. You need to go out and ditch those screws and get yourself shorter screws. I guess relatively speaking, if you line them up like this, you can see just about how long they need to be. I could go get a tape measure and measure them, but The ones that come are too long. They actually span all the way to the end here, and when you start screwing it into the back of the damper, you end up scratching the behind it, so you don't want them to be that long. When these set in here, they should protrude maybe, I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch, barely. So that's all you need to do to grab onto the bolt, or excuse me, to grab onto the damper. So pretty much I use this. I get myself a breaker bar like so. I stick the tool on, I stick this whole assembly right here onto the crank pulley. These 2 bolts hold the tool on to the crank. I'll go ahead and get those on now so you can see what that looks like. You don't really have to worry about setting this motor at top dead center just yet. We'll get there in a minute. And crazy on it, just enough to keep it snug so that way it doesn't move. And so obviously we're going left to loosen it. So this tool is going to opposite, it's going to want to swing up to the right as you're looking at it. It's going to go like this. So I actually let it swing up and catch the bottom of the frame rail right here on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and put my tool on here now, my breaker bar. And then I actually just turn it over by hand until it comes up to reach the frame rail over here on this side. See, now it's hitting the frame rail over here. You can see my bar is right here, it's going off, and it's, if I start cranking on it, the frame rail will hold this in place. Alternatively, you could have somebody else hold that side, but I just let the frame rail hold it because the frame rail is strong enough. And then I make sure everything here is tight and secure. Then I grab myself another breaker bar, and you need a 22mm socket. A deep socket is what you're going to need because you have to get past this here tool, and it needs to sit in a place like so. So get yourself a 22mm socket. Then you can go on ahead and stick that on this guy like this, and then go on ahead and try your best to break it free. Sometimes you can get away with just using one breaker bar. Other times you'll need to get like some kind of a cheater stick to help you. I mean, I've seen guys use 5 foot long cheater bars to help them. That's what I'm going to do. I mean, at that point we're just using physics, so work smarter, not harder, as most people say. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my cheater bar now and try and get this thing loose. Okay, so I got that guy on there. I'm going ahead and slide a pipe on top of this guy, and then go on ahead and pull on this to try and break this thing loose. As you can see, it just broke loose right there, that loud pop you heard. So go on ahead and just continue to loosen it up, and that's it, it's loose. So like I said, this tool is a lifesaver. I struggled before doing it without this tool, and let me tell you, this tool works the best. So now that that's loose, you can go on ahead and push back down to relieve the pressure, and then you can go on ahead and take that out. Now is the time where we can go on ahead and set the timing where it needs to be. We'll go on ahead and remove the serpentine belt first, and then we can go on ahead and it's easier to see the timing belt marks after that. You want to grab yourself a 14mm wrench. Right here is a tensioner. We can go on ahead and take the serpentine belt off. Okay, got myself a 14, goes right here on this guy. Do take a picture of how the belt is routed in case you forget. You kind of just swing it up to the right like so, take the belt off, and let the tensioner go like so. It's a good time to replace the serpentine belt. Okay, now that we broke that loose, I will say now that you will need to get a crank pulley puller or harmonic balancer puller. You can rent any of those at O'Reilly, or if you want to go online and buy one, you can buy one. It pretty much looks like kind of like a broomstick, I guess. It has 3 pieces that come straight out like this that are holes, and then there's one part that sticks straight up. You just use it to pull off the harmonic balancer. We'll worry about that in a minute when we get there. Right now we're going to go on ahead and take off this here cover. It's just held on by 5mm Allen socket. You just lift this guy straight up like this and set it down to the side. Now as you can see, this exposes the cam gear, so now we can set the timing at top dead center for cylinder 1 like we need to. Okay, so as you look closely at the front of the motor, you have both cam gears, intake, exhaust. If you look just behind it on this cover, this black metal cover, there are two little humps. There's one right here, I don't know if you can see in the camera, and there's one right here. They're directly behind the cam gears. But you might be able to see, yeah, you can barely see the little notch right here. These notches are what needs to be lined up to these two humps in the back of the motor right here in the back. Additionally, there are marks on the harmonic balancer that also need to line up. So let me focus down there on a harmonic balancer right now. You can see there's a 10 and a 0. Go ahead and turn this guy around until you see a line or a mark. Now you see I just went right past one mark that was on there. Let me go backwards so you can see what it looks like. There's one mark right here. There's a notch right here that comes up first. This is the advancement, ignition advancement. You're not worried about this mark right here. What you want is for the second mark that comes around. I'll show you. I'm going to rotate it around now. If you rotate the motor around, you'll see another hash mark come up. You want to line that one up with the 0. Right now it's on the 0. I'm sorry if you can't see it in the camera, but these marks are really not hard to find. They're pretty easy to look at. You see that mark right there? That's the mark that you want. There is two. There's one right here and there's one over here. Don't worry about this one. You worry about the one that's farthest left. You'll line that up with the 0, and then you also want to make sure when you come up here and look at your cam gears, you can see this little notch right here is lined up with the hump in the back, and the notch right here is lined up with the hump in the back. That's all you care about. You don't want to move the motor from here. You want to leave it just like this. Granted, you'll probably see the cam gears move very slightly when we go to loosen them up and take the cam gears off to do the camshaft seals behind them. But this is the timing marks that you're after. Again, do not pay attention to the little dots on the side. And yeah, okay, you want this mark to line up with that hump, and this mark right here to line up with this hump in the back, and then you want that timing mark right there to line up on the 0. That's all that matters. So right now I'm going to go ahead and fully remove this crank, this damper crank pulley. I'm going to take that bolt out now, and like I said, you will need to use a crank puller to take that off. So I'm going to go ahead and get that off now. Okay, so the tool that you have to pull off the harmonic balancer, it looks a little something like this. You thread this guy in here like this, like so, goes straight in like so. Just goes straight in here like this. Then you'll stick the screws, you know, the ones that we use to hold the special tool in to break the crank pulley loose. Use those two screws. Just hold, you'll hold it in here like this, and pretty much as you spin this off, it's pulling the crank pulley off like this. This little special tip right here goes right into the middle where the crank pulley bolt was, so you can go ahead and just remove the crank pulley bolt altogether. This kind of guy will just sit in here just like so, like this, and as you're tightening this, it'll pull the crank pulley off. So it is a 19 millimeter on the end of this particular tool. So as you can see, as you tighten this guy up right here on the end, as you tighten that guy up, then it'll force the crank pulley off. So go ahead and just start tightening this guy up, and you'll start to see it slowly come off as it's doing now. Pretty much just wiggle it. Should be able to just wiggle this guy off the rest of the way, just like so, and you can see it comes off. Don't worry about the timing mark. There is a timing mark that's hiding back there that you'll be able to see later on. So don't get bent out of shape, but right now do your best. If you look straight down at the crank where you pull it off, sometimes there is a, well, actually every time there is a little thing that's called a Woodruff key. It's a little piece of metal that sits into the shaft. Make sure that you do not lose that. Most of the time it just stays right there in place, but sometimes it'll get stuck in the crank. It sits in that little, it sits in this little notch right here. This little notch right here that's in there. There's a little key. You want to make sure you have that. Sometimes it gets stuck in this thing. Most of the time it gets stuck on the crank. If it's stuck on the crank, that's fine, just leave it there. But make sure you don't. Now don't move the cams, don't move the crank so that you don't mess up the timing, because we've already set it how it needs to be. So now we're going to go ahead and focus on taking the rest of these plastic timing covers off. They are just held on by various, well, the upper portion here is held on by 2 more or 3 more Allen screws, so we'll go ahead and get those off now. Again, I really apologize for the lighting, I just have to make do. So now we're going to take off this upper timing cover. It's held on by the 5mm Allens that you use to take this top portion off. You can see this thing has been leaking profusely. So there's one here on the side that comes right off. There's one right here in the middle that you're probably going to need a long Allen key to reach. And I just had one and I just set it down and I don't know what I did with it. But you'll need a long Allen key to reach that one. Oh, I stuck it in my pocket. Something like this. It'll go right in here to break that loose. And then there's one that's hiding right behind this power steering pump pulley. I've actually found it easiest to use a wobble socket like this. It has a wobble end and you should be able to get back there to at least break it loose enough. Alternatively, if you do have the long Allen like this, you can probably reach back here like this and break it free this way as well, which is probably the way I'm going to use. Got this guy loose and just pull it off. Now's a good time to clean this stuff up if you want to clean it up. Okay, the next thing you want to do now is to take off this serpentine belt tensioner. It's held on by 3 12mm bolts. You can just look directly back into the back and break those guys free. Not too much drama there. Go ahead and pull this timing tensioner off. A bar like this, and just put the tool on first, and then just put it right behind it. That'll allow you to break it free. These are on kind of tight, but here I broke that free. So if you put the tool on first, then put just the pry bar right behind it, or a flathead screwdriver, that'll allow you to break it free. So you don't need to go out and rent a special pulley holder. What you need to do is to loosen up this power steering pump bracket. If you're looking straight down at it, at the bracket itself, this guy here, there's one bolt that comes straight down right here. I'm sorry you can't see it on camera. It's staring you right in the face. It's a 14mm. You can't miss it. And then if you look directly behind these holes in the power steering pump, inside the holes, you know, you spin this guy around, in the holes in the bottom there are 2 14mm bolts. You can just stick a ratchet and a socket straight through the holes to break those loose. You're doing this so that you can get access to the lower timing cover. Loosen up. You don't actually have to take it all the way off. It'll kind of just it'll just be loose how it is. The other two, the guys, you can remove completely. This is the bracket that you're trying to remove. So one screw goes in here. Excuse me, one bolt. The other bolt goes in here like this, and this one kind of just slides into place like that. Man, I am just dropping everything today. Okay, now that you look at the lower part of this cover, there are various 10mm bolts that are holding it on. One right here in the middle, one right here on the side that is just behind that power steering bracket you took off. And there's one down here at the bottom, one down here at the bottom also, and one right underneath the water pump. So go ahead and loosen and remove all of those. Okay, after you get that loose, this timing cover just comes straight off. This one has been leaking so much, as you can tell, there's oil all over it. Okay, now here you can see we have the timing belt tensioner pulley right here. The actual auto timer, the tensioner is actually right here. There's a little guide right here that guides the timing belt. Pull that off now so you don't lose it. Do remember that it only goes on one direction. It kind of flares towards the outside, towards you, so make sure you keep that in mind when you go to put it back on. The key is right here that I was talking to you about. So what I like to do before I remove any timing belt is I go grab myself a pen or a marker or some sort, and mark where the timing marks are at on the belt. Mark directly on the belt and give yourself some reference marks, so that way you're just double checking, you're being redundant. Obviously you have it set at top dead center right now. If you put the new belt on, everything should be good. But I don't like to just follow only that one rule. I like to actually mark the timing belt before I take it off. That way I can count the teeth and apply that to the new belt and mark it as well. Like I said, it's not a step that some people do. I do it because I just want to make sure, because the last thing you want to do is to, you know, ruin your motor and spend thousands of dollars on repairing it when you could have just marked the stupid belt. So I'm going to go ahead and get myself a marker and mark the belt now. You can choose to mark the belt wherever you like. I personally like to mark the belt, the timing belt, on the top here where the timing marks are at. I just physically mark the actual belt itself where it went with a, you know, a mark that you can see, and I mark the two dots at where the belt needs to sit in between at. That's where I like to mark them at. And then also I mark the other one so that way I can count the teeth in between here, so I know, you know, where it goes and where it should be sat at. And then I'll go down and actually mark the crankshaft down there. I'll mark that belt where it physically starts touching the pulley down there. See if I can zoom in on it down there for you. Yeah, I'll mark the belt down there where it starts to touch this pulley. So I'll mark it like here where it actually is about to start touching it. And I'll mark the other side where it's just about leaving it. So that way I have a good reference. I won't get myself lost. I don't know, you know, I won't confuse myself when it's time. So just do that just as a precaution. You don't have to, but I recommend doing it because, trust me, it'll save you later on. So right now we can go on ahead and remove the belt. The tensioner is held on by two 12mm bolts. The bolts are actually accessed from the bottom, so you will want to crawl under the bottom. There's a 12mm right here and 12mm on the back side that you need to access. If you just stick an extension and a wobble 12 in there straight from the bottom, you can break those free. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done now. Just like so. Okay, now that we got the tensioner off, you can see that this here pulley is now loose and the tension is off the belt. Using a 10mm Allen, you go ahead and loosen up this idler pulley here and just take it all the way off, and you can pull the pulley out. Just like so, and that is out. You will need to transfer this bolt to the new one, so don't lose it. There's also a washer that goes on the back side of that, so don't forget that either, because that gives the proper spacing so that the timing belt can ride true. Otherwise you risk damaging your timing belt when you put it on. So don't forget that those are there. Okay, now that you got that tensioner off, you can go ahead and just slip the belt off. Just like so, and you could set it down. Try not to mess up your marks. And then we can focus on getting that bottom crank pulley gear pulled off so that you can replace the front crank seal behind there. Sometimes you get lucky and you can just grab these and pull them off, but most of the time that's not the case. So we shall try though. So there is one little holder down here. There's a 10mm that's right next to this gear. It's there to stop this from coming off. You can just loosen it up, take it off. Forget where it goes. Now, like I said, there is a key on here. Most of the time it's just pretty much welded into place. This crank gear, sometimes you can get lucky and it'll just come straight off by prying on it. Sometimes it'll come out, but most of the time that's not the case. So you go ahead and use the same puller that you used to pull the harmonic balancer off. Just you can use the same puller to now go on ahead and pull that guy off. So we'll go ahead and get that set up. Okay, so as you can see, I got something rigged up there that will allow me to pull that little crank pulley off. Sometimes, like I said, you can pull it off by hand, sometimes not. But as you can see, I can just turn this thing by hand and it's pulling off that crank gear, no problem. There are seal pullers, something like these, that you can kind of get in there to try and pry them out. Before you use something like this, what I recommend doing is to take a drill bit with a very small drill bit and drill a hole straight directly into the face of this thing. Just drill a hole right into it. Then you can come in here with the pick like so and try to pry it out. You don't really want to pry too much around, you know, around the area of the crank or this here housing, because you need it to be able to seal. Alternatively, I've also seen people drill holes in there and stick small screws in there, like a self-tapping screw. They'll stick the screw in there. That way they can use a pair of pliers to grab the screw and pull it out. I'm gonna go with the way I've always done. I use a really small, thin pry bar, and I come right here on this part. This part's not gonna hurt anything on prying on this. This is fine. And I stick it just right. I just force it right inside the bottom of the lip. And I kind of pry it out like this. Trust me, it's not going to come out that easily, but most of the time they'll come out fairly easily like this. And then you can try your best to keep it clean. Make sure you clean inside the area where the new seal is going to sit at. I don't think it'll, there you go. Rub some oil, clean oil around the outside. That's it. You don't need to rub it anywhere else. What you do is you take it and you kind of start to seat it back into place like so. Just so you can kind of get it started. Just so it's kind of all even around. You see it's all even there. You got it all started. A hammer and a short extension, and I just tap it in all the way around very lightly so that it gets seated into place. You don't have to go crazy on it. Just tap it in kind of lightly to start it, and then it should go right in. So now you can go on ahead and grab the crank gear and just slide it back on into place. Don't forget to put this little retainer's little metal tab back in there as well. Don't hammer it hard. As you can see, we got the gear back in, got the little retaining screw guy right there back in, and yeah, now we can just work on the water pump. Okay, in the back, as you're looking at the water pump, it sits on like this. If you flip around and see this port right here, this is in the back that's near the exhaust. There are two 12mm nuts that are holding on back there. You can't really see them with the camera, but they're directly under the exhaust. You can just reach them with a normal ratchet and a short or long 12mm socket. So, as I said, you won't be able to see it because they're hiding very well. This water pump goes back just underneath this exhaust right here. There are two 12mm nuts that you need to loosen up. You can just use a regular ratchet and a 12mm socket. Down here where the wiring harnesses and stuff is at, I went on ahead and disconnected this one 10mm that holds this whole wiring harness on. I disconnected this connector from the alternator, and I took this connector off from right here. You do need to loosen this 12 right here to release this bracket from here, so that when you pull the water pump off, it doesn't want to come with it. Just like so. You can screw this back into the water pump. Okay, additionally, on the side of the head, come up some, right here next to this is the coolant bypass. There are two 10mm bolts holding this on, and this guy right here is actually press fit onto here with an O-ring holding it on. So I'm going to loosen both these up, and then it will take a little bit of force to get those to come off. You can use a pry bar to kind of help you get it off, but it'll just come off like this, and if you wiggle this around enough, you should be able to pull it straight off. Pry bars definitely help. Just like so. This is a good time to check the O-rings to see if they're damaged or cracked. Most of the time you can reuse them and they're fine. You can obviously, by all means, go ahead and track down whatever new O-rings you want. I've done jobs like these many times and not have any issues with it resealing. So do make sure you take that off, set this guy down to the side, and then clean up the area that goes to the cylinder head, because you'll need that to be nice and clean. And you will want to put your drain pan under here because there might be some leftover coolant that may come out. So there's 5 right here, and there's one directly underneath the water pump as well. What you need to do is grab a 14mm and loosen that bolt up. That way we can free up the last little bit of the water pump from the engine block. You can see it's loose right there. Just let all that run out. Because that is the last guy holding him on. If you look down directly underneath the alternator, there's another 14mm nut that's down there. I'm going to go ahead and loosen that one up as well, so that way I can just break loose, or not break loose. I'm not going to take it all the way off. I'm just going to loosen it up so that way the alternator can be free to move down like that, you see? So that way we can get this water pump out of here. So this is the old water pump, drain everything all out. We will be transferring this water neck to the new water pump, and if you get a new thermostat, you want to go ahead and just use a new thermostat. However, if you want to reuse the old one, which I don't suggest, I suggest just getting a new thermostat since you're already here. So don't throw this away just yet. We'll go on ahead and get the new water pump. Okay, now that you got the water pump off, go on ahead and just wipe up the area. Your gasket or your kit should come with a new O-ring right here that goes around where the water pump comes at, and also come with a new seal for this pipe that's right here in the back. Don't forget that little guy. You can just pick this O-ring out with a little pick. These are just 2 10mm bolts here. Just loosen those both up. You got this guy, went on like this. When you install the thermostat, do note there is a little, you can hear it, like a little pin up here. Do note that the direction that was when you're based on how you pull this out. So this water pump sits like this. Pretty much you want that thing to be facing directly north, straight up to the sky when you sit it into this housing. You want to have it face straight up and slide this into place. Do be careful. You do it just in one motion so that you're not knocking around this O-ring over here, and then you can get the bolts that hold it into place. We're down to 15 foot-pounds. So go on ahead and ready to go. Don't forget to tighten the 2 back 12mm bolts that are underneath the exhaust. I'm gonna go ahead and put those on now. Turn over the 2 bolts that hold on this wiring harness right here. Okay, got that back tight and reinstalled. Go ahead and install this bypass valve back into place. Okay, just because you tighten up the top part to the head doesn't mean that the bottom part's all the way seated. You need to make sure you push it in there completely, all the way in there, as tight as you can get it, as far as you can get it, and then tighten up these. 112 right here, that goes on the side. And then the 10 goes right here. I'll worry about that one in a minute, actually, because I'm actually just going to leave this loose, because when we take off the valve cover, we need to have as much room as we can get. But you can go ahead and swing the alternator back up into place and tighten up that 14mm that was in there, just so you can get it. Okay, so you disconnect this here. Go on ahead and disconnect the coil pack harness. Try your best not to snap the tabs off. You probably will though, but just try your best not to. You can't really help it because they're just so old. So they do get snapped off. It's all right. Okay, this wiring harness should be held on right here by a 5mm Allen, so you can take that one off. pretty much you want to try and get the wiring harness as loose as you can get it. You'll want to disconnect this one connector back here in the back. If you have a pick, slide it directly into this notch right here in the back, and it should allow you to slide this guy off like so, and then you can disconnect it. This is for the O2 sensor, the rear O2 sensor. That goes down here. It's held on by a 10 millimeter right here, so we can go ahead and loosen that guy up. Or excuse me, not a 10 in the middle. The 10 is right here in the middle. Like I said, do keep track of where the screws go. So that's one guy out right here. I'm not going to disconnect these from the coil packs. All the wiring, all the spark plug wiring, I'm going to leave the same, just to make sure that you either take a picture so you remember where it goes, and I'm going to loosen up the other one right here in the middle for the other wiring harness. So now the wiring harness itself is fairly free. I'm going to take out the spark plug wires, take them out of their holders. Okay, all the coil packs are held down by a 10 millimeter. You probably have to use a ratchet back here on this one. If you can get back there with a power tool, by all means, but you'll have to move this hose out of the way so you can get to it. So all of these now will just lift straight up off of the spark plugs that they're on. They may take a little bit of a persuasion, but they'll come off. Same with these. You just lift these guys straight up off of here like this. Do remember where they all go, so that way you don't get confused. Take yourself a picture if you need to take a picture, like I'm about to do right now, so I remember. Okay, so now it's up to you if you want to change the spark plugs or not now. I'm not going to do them now. I'm going to leave them how they are. I'll change them in a minute. Now pretty much your concern is trying to get the valve covers off. They're all held on by 10 millimeter screws. There are a few nuts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Each should have 8. You're just gonna have to do your best to get this wiring harness free. I actually am going to, there's a nut right here on the side. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. There's a nut right here behind the dipstick, a 10 millimeter nut that I'm going to loosen up that's holding on the wiring harness. Just trying to get as much play out of the harness as I can. It might not help a lot. There's also 2 nuts directly here that are holding the wiring harness that I'm going to loosen up as well. Again, probably not necessary, but when I've done these in the past, I mean, every little bit helps. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen up both those guys. That way, I mean, it helps a little bit. And like I said, when you come to take off this here guy, you're gonna have to just do your best to try and maneuver the valve cover under this black plastic cover. Like I said, if you snap it, I mean, so be it. It happens. So don't worry about it. Screws. So got that guy loose. The gasket is in here. I'm gonna go ahead and get the other one off. This is a little bit more flexible, but you do need to lift straight up to get them off the studs, and then you can bolts loose in the front for the cam gears. Those are also going to get torqued down to 60 foot-pounds when you put them back on. So if you look on the camshaft, I don't know if it's getting too dark for you to see, but if you look on the camshaft, right here on the camshaft, there's a hexagonal spot mark on the cam itself. It's designed to hold a wrench right here on both cams. It's designed to hold a wrench so that you can hold this cam while you're loosening them bolts here, so that way you don't accidentally spin the cam around and ruin the timing, because remember, you have to keep it on your marks. Now I understand it may move a tooth or so, and that's fine. Try your best to keep it as straight as possible. But this front one here is a 17 millimeter. This here cam gear actually has a an Allen head, 14 millimeter Allen head cover that you need to take off. When you pull this cover off, oil is going to come out of here, because this is a VVT gear. It's oil pressure driven to advance and retard timing on its own. So don't be alarmed if oil comes out of here. So you got to take off this cover first, and then behind there is another bolt that's actually holding this on. And remember, we're doing this so we can take this here timing cover off, so that we can get to the camshaft seals behind here, which always leak. Okay, so now that you got the wrench on the cam here, you can see this is an 1.25 inch wrench. Stick it on there to hold that in place. Then you're going ahead and use a 17mm to break this guy here loose, trying your best to keep this in position just like so. Now if the cam moves a little bit like mine just did, that's okay. You can totally just rotate it back to where it was at. No big deal. And break the other one loose, which remember is a 14mm Allen head. Like I said, this cam gear does move freely, but it's not, if you look, it's not actually turning the camshaft itself, because the computer adjusts the timing on this. So if it moves like this, that's okay. Actually, when you take the cover off, you will be moving it back and forth to get the most of the oil to come out. So you're going ahead and grab the 1.25 inch wrench again to hold the camshaft in the position like so, and then you go on ahead and break this guy loose. That actually won't be on very tight, so that one was loose. Go on ahead and take this off, and you'll see that there'll be oil that comes out of here. Cover, it just looks like this. You can go on ahead and do this to get most of the oil to come out. Inside of that hole, there is another bolt that's actually holding on the cam gear. That is a 10mm Allen. This is the one that you're going to re-torque back to 60 foot-pounds when it's time. Same with this one. Do not torque the outer cover to 60 foot-pounds because you will just destroy it. So again, holding the cam with the 1.25 inch, we're going to go on ahead and break this other guy loose. Okay, got these both broke free. As I said, oil is going to come out of this guy, but you can go ahead and just loosen this up. Then these cam gears will just pull straight off. Then after that, we can remove the timing cover here in the front, and then go about replacing the seals that are behind them. This one's a little bit more tricky to get at because the bolt is recessed in here. This one should also just pull straight off. Remember, there'll be oil on this guy. Lots of oil. So go ahead and wipe that off. Okay, that gear will just pull straight off like this. You can just set it down. Now, as I said, there'll be oil that are just going to drip out of here. Do your best not to touch these camshafts or move them. You can go on ahead and remove this timing cover that's held on by 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm screws, and then after that you'll be able to see the cam seals behind them. You have the cam or the timing cover off. Excuse me, it's dark. I'm ending the video here. I'll finish in the morning. These are the cam seals that are around here. These are not as hard to get out as the crank seal on the bottom, but we'll go ahead and tackle those in the morning. We're just going to loosen up these two cam bearing caps here. That'll allow it to free up the seal a little bit easier. I'm going to get those replaced, put the timing cover back on, put the cam gears back on, do the valve covers, put those back on, and then we can do the spark plugs. So I'll get back with you guys in the morning. Okay guys, we left off last night in the dark. Now we're going to remove these two here camshaft seals, get the new ones installed. Part number 90311 420. You'll need 2 of them. These are a little bit easier than the bottom ones. You can just loosen up these caps. You don't have to remove these all the way, just loosen them up some so you can get some play. You have to excuse my voice, I'm getting a little sick. Just like so. Pry bar to kind of help you move these guys up a little bit. So you can get in here and pull the seal out, just like so. Well, you can't pry on this side because it's attached here to this pole, so you're gonna have to pry up on the other side as best as you can to get it to come up, so that way you can gain access to the seal. There you go, got that guy out. So you can go ahead and just tap in 2 new seals. Make sure you get all the excess debris out of here, because there will be some in here. Ones, like I said, should be a lot easier to get started. Sometimes you can even push them in by hand like that completely and tighten this down. Same for the other one. The other one you may have to hammer in, but nonetheless you should be able to get it in, no problem. Just make sure it's all nice and level. Tighten these back down. Okay, so here you can see I have a new valve cover. I've already went on ahead and removed the old gasket. You can just use a pick to pick out the old gasket and pull it all out. Wipe everything down. What I suggest you do before you put the new gasket into place is to run a small bead of silicone, black silicone, around this whole thing. That way when you set the gasket in there, it'll stay in place, because you will be maneuvering it a lot when you go to put it back on, and the chances of the gasket falling out of place is pretty high. So I usually just put some silicone in there. It'll kind of keep it sticky and tacky to hold it into place, so that way the gasket doesn't move when I'm moving it all around. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. You don't have to put a lot, just a little bit. So you press it firmly into position. Thing for the other one, and then we'll go on ahead and just sit them back down on top of the cylinder head. These are going to get torqued down to 74 inch-pounds for the 10mm bolts. Okay, once you get the new seals in, go on ahead and install this rear timing cover back into place. Just slides right back into place. Okay, so now go ahead and grab the cam gear. It just goes on one direction. Can't really get it wrong. Just slide it right back into place. Like so. And then remember, you need to use the 1¼ wrench to hold the cam as you tighten this back on. These need to get torqued to 60 foot-pounds. Both of them, this one and this one. This bolt in the middle is 60 foot-pounds. The little cover that's on the outside is 15 foot-pounds. So don't get them confused. Don't try to torque so hard on the outside one, because that one will definitely break. So I'll go ahead and put this guy back into place like so, and get the bolt for that guy. Okay, we got the valve covers back on, tightened down to 74 inch-pounds. Don't forget the wiring harness. We'll leave this part here free. You can go on ahead and reattach, the various little pieces here to the side of the water pump. The little bracket for the side of the water pump. You can go on ahead and reattach that stuff back. You can attach the alternator connectors, all the connectors. You can attach the O2 sensor here back into the bag and go ahead and get that stuff all tightened up. Don't forget to put the 3 nuts, if you did take them off for the wiring loom, don't forget to put those back. The next thing we're going to do is focus on getting these spark plugs out. So I'm going to go ahead and reconnect all these connectors. I'll get right back with you. I think it's 5/8 spark plug socket, the smaller of the two. There's usually 5/8 and 13/16. So don't forget to do that. Oh, before I forget, also don't forget to put the little cover back here onto this cam gear. I completely forgot. Torque this down to 15 foot-pounds. The wiring harness back into place, and connect all the connectors. Idler pulley into place. Got the new one here. You're going to torque this down to, it's a 10mm Allen. You're going to torque it down to 26 foot-pounds. So go on ahead. Don't forget that there's a washer. The washer goes behind. It goes behind the tensioner, and then this guy just slides into place like this. This goes in this direction like so, and you can just start it by hand first. You don't have to worry about sticking you don't have to worry about sticking the tensioner in there just yet. We'll worry about that after we get the belt on. Okay, so you can see we could just leave it loose like that. That's completely fine. And then we're going ahead and put the new timing belt on into place. Make sure that you have your marks all lined up. Remember, the 2 hash marks get lined up with the timing covers in the back. And then just try not to let anything move as you're putting it on. Okay, you should be able to slide this guy completely into place. Check that your marks are still all lined up correctly. What you're going to do is going to go on ahead and get the auto tensioner. And remember, it's held on by 2 12mm bolts on the bottom. Go on ahead and get that. And then we can go on and tighten that guy up. There is a little grenade pin that's on it. This guy right here has a little pin on it. It's designed to be in here until you're absolutely ready to pull it out. That'll set the tension on this here pulley for you. Don't pull that out until you're absolutely sure that everything is lined up correctly. You got everything where it needs to be at. And that way you don't, because if you pull this out, the little plunger comes out and it's kind of hard to get it back into position. You'd have to put it in a vise and squeeze it back down and stick the pin back in. So don't pull this pin out until you're absolutely ready. The way the torque for that is 20 foot-pounds for this tensioner. So we're going ahead and get that installed now into the bottom here. And make sure you got everything correctly in position as it should be, and I have everything as it should be. So when you know you're ready for sure, you can go on ahead and pull this grenade pin out, and that'll automatically set the tension for this here tensioner. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And so now you have the tension that's set, the tension that needs to be set. I like to go on ahead and double check this when I put everything back together and I get the crank pulley and the covers back on. I'll go ahead and spin the motor over by hand to make sure that the timing marks line up as they should. But yeah, so now we can just pretty much get back to putting everything back together. We'll go on ahead and get the lower timing cover first. It's just a plastic. It's held on by a few 10mm screws. So I'll go ahead and get that now. You can't forget to put the timing belt guide back on. Sorry guys. That just slides back over into place. Remember, the flared side faces out towards you. Just like that. It just pops right into place. Grab your harmonic balancer and we can go on ahead and stick that guy back on. Now this one gets torqued down to 241 foot-pounds, I believe. Honestly, you're going to be really hard pressed to even find a torque wrench that will read that high. So what I do is I max out my torque wrench, which is at 150 foot-pounds. Well, I go to 160-ish. And the way that the engine spins, it spins in a direction that's going to be constantly tightening the bolt anyway. I've never had an issue. So go ahead and just slide this back into place. You will need to use the bolt to help you pull it into place. Slightly tap it on with the hammer if you'd like, but if you just get the bolt and grab the bolt and start tightening the bolt, it'll pull the balancer in to position for you. So the same way you went to break this bolt loose, it'll be the same tool you use. You use the tool, the holder that I showed you guys before. Use the breaker bar to come up against the frame rail and tighten this thing down. Rotate the motor over a few times to make sure that the timing marks come back up. Okay, so the first timing mark comes up right there. That's not the one we're looking for. We're going to the next one, which is right there. And if we look, timing marks still line up as they should, so you know you're good to go there. Go on ahead and put the water pump pulley back on. So in order to tighten these up, like I said, stick the wrench on and then just hold the deal in place like this against itself, and you can get them to be tightened on. Power steering pump bracket, remember the bracket that slides in the bottom here along the back side of the power steering pump. It's held on by 3 14mm bolts, one that you can get to right here, and the other 2 you have to go through the power steering pump pulley to tighten on. And behind here, and start them by hand into place. Okay, so go on ahead now and grab the serpentine belt tensioner, the auto tensioner for the serpentine belt, and go ahead and bolt that into place here. It's 3 12mm bolts. Do not drop these down into the timing belt area, because you will not like having to fish them out. Most likely you'll have to take this all apart again just to get them out. Go on ahead and get yourself a 14mm socket and a breaker bar. That way you can put it onto the tensioner here, and then get if you have a new serpentine belt, go ahead and put the serpentine belt on. If you don't have a new serpentine belt, then you just reuse the old one. Okay, now we're going to focus on getting this Y piece back into place. Don't forget to wipe it off as clean as you can on the surface. If you remember, on the bottom there's some vacuum hoses that go in from here. The evap guy goes in there, and then also this small guy here on the bottom. So just do your best to get them into position. Now we can go on ahead and attach the throttle body housing, remove these screws, and we'll go ahead and get the housing into place. Not forget that there is small coolant hoses that run into the back here, and then the other one that comes along from the side over here as well. You should put this one on first, and then you can go on ahead and do the bottom one. You can also go on ahead and put the this breather hose back on. This guy just goes right here, straight down onto here, and also the PCV that's held on right here by this 10 millimeter. Just push this guy straight down in here. Okay, got that guy on. And then this thing will just slide back onto this. It'll slide back onto the shaft here on the bottom, and then you can also reattach this coolant hose right here as well. Don't forget to take the electrical connector, connect it back into the throttle position sensor here, like so. Go ahead and get the bracket that sits right here on the bottom. Loosen up take all these here nuts off if you left them on, and then just get those all nice and tightened up. Go ahead and reattach this here 10 millimeter for this wiring harness. We can go on ahead and get the throttle cable. Remember, you just thread it into position over here on the side. I'm going to put this timing cover into position here. Should be able to slide it in like so, and it's just held on by 5 millimeter Allen screws. Don't forget to plug this little connector back in. That just sets right back on top like so, and it's held on by 1, 2, 3, 4 Allen head screws as well. Alright, so got that all back together now. Now we can go ahead and slip the radiator back into place. If you look straight down and onto the radiator where it sits at, there are small little rubber grommets that it'll sit into. Pretty much you just take the radiator and just slide it right back into how you got it. It's really not too difficult. It's pretty easy. You can see there's a hole right there. There's supposed to be a grommet right there. It actually stuck to the radiator, so I'm gonna go ahead and just slide the new radiator into place. While you're down there, you can connect the radiator fans back, the coolant temperature sensor. Also, you can connect all that back down there. You can put the transmission lines back into place as well. I got the radiator here into place. I'm going ahead and get the radiator stays and put them back, the clamps that hold the radiator into position. Don't forget to connect a little air breather over here for the fuse box. We can go on ahead and reinstall the upper radiator hose. Okay, we can go ahead and put the air box assembly back into position. This guy goes right back onto here like so. There's an arrow on top that you can line up with to get the positioning right. Then there's this vacuum hose right here that runs from the valve cover back onto the back of this here pipe. This into here. This guy goes right onto this here evap solenoid, and the mass airflow sensor gets plugged up here, and then this little guy gets plugged up into the evap solenoid as well. The last piece of the air box we have to put on is this here piece that goes attached right here, this 10 millimeter. It's like the snorkel. I'm not going to put that on yet because I want to start this up and make sure that it doesn't have any leaks or anything like that. But that's pretty much honestly all the rest of the video. You'll just fill up the coolant, leave the car jacked up like this, fill up the coolant, put the temperature setting all the way to max hot, put the fan speed to about mid speed, fill this guy up, squeeze the hoses to get air movement through there, and that's pretty much it. So if you have any comments or questions, please ask them in the comment section below. If it's your first time to the channel, thanks very much for stopping by. I appreciate your guys' support and watching my videos. It really goes a long way. I will see you guys next time.